Hi everyone.
Okay.
So, good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to the seventh webinar of Atlantic Analytica. My name is Shiveti Biswas. I am from the research team, and I'll be moderating today's discussion along with my colleagues Hariharan and Anmol Jain, who have joined us as panelists. We appreciate our viewers for taking their time out and joining us. Please shoot your questions in the comment box below so that we take them up accordingly towards the end. Our topic of discussion for today is about the most controversial and debated issue since months now, that is China and COVID-19. Before we proceed with the discussion, let me brief you all with the introduction of the subject matter. So, starting off with the very numbers, COVID-19 has now infected over 16 million people and has claimed more than 6 lakh lives worldwide. WHO had declared coronavirus to be a pandemic due to widespread scale of the outbreak. The United Nations termed this pandemic to be the worst global health crisis since World War II, and since still we see no end to this until we come up with a vaccine for the cure. In terms of the number of coronavirus cases confirmed, US, Brazil, India, China are among the most affected countries, overtaking China way before, wherein the pandemic had actually started last December. So, with the constant lockdowns, safety and precautionary measures that all the nations are taking in order to flatten the curve, that have led all of us to sit at our respective houses and work from home. Growing controversy over China's healthcare measures, its influence in WHO, its Cold War tactics, etc., are at the center stage now. Critiques allege as to how China has been responsible for causing this whole pandemic, how it had hidden facts about the death rate and number of people infected in the early stage, used its position and influence in the WHO, silenced doctors, journalists who attempted to talk about it, which led to close to almost 5 billion people to leave the city and spread the virus in the whole world. Wherein China claims to have been helping the other nations with medical supplies, also portraying that how there are lessons to be learned from the model that it has used to overcome the pandemic. And amongst all these predicaments, where half of the world is still struggling with the first wave, Asia has been faced with the second wave of COVID-19, prompting fresh lockdowns. The National Health Commission of China last week confirmed more than 100 new coronavirus cases, most of which were reported from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and one from Beijing. So most of these were locally transmitted and few were imported. Also, 15 out of these were reported to be asymptomatic. Although no death rates have been reported, but this curve echoes the trend in the world where infections are also rising, and we are yet to see how China handles this second wave of pandemic. Along these lines, I put up my first question for the discussion, and this question is to you, Anmol. That compared to China's early response to the pandemic, how prepared does the dragon seems to cope up with the new wave?
See, if we talk about the first, before going to the second wave of the COVID-19, we need to discuss and have a knowledge about the first wave of the COVID-19 and how China actually deals with it. So there is no going back to the fact that China actually mishandled the first wave of COVID-19, and not only this, it has a prior knowledge or no information what is happening within its own boundaries regarding the COVID-19. But even though it's having no information and no contact, no information regarding what is happening within its country, yet it is very surprising to know that China is able to manage and keep us all under a wrap under a bubble wrap basically regarding the spread of COVID-19, and none of us have no knowledge regarding actually the actual spread of COVID-19 until the mid-January, when we are able to see much larger wave of COVID-19 across different nations of the world also, whether it's Japan or it's Brazil or Italy, USA. Until we are able to see cases in other regions of the world also, we have no knowledge regarding the COVID-19. And this basically shows a lack of openness and lack of transparency when it comes to the Chinese style of bureaucracy or Chinese authority over its domain, its functioning, its government functioning. Not only this, but also shows that China, on its Olympic front, is lacking more important information as having a internal dispute within the territory itself. As it was very shocking to me to know that during the COVID-19 period, both the province and the center are blaming each other regarding the spread of COVID-19. As the province is saying that they are not provided with basic healthcare facilities and they are not ready to cope up with the COVID-19 facilities. On the other hand, countries believing that they are not, they have no prior knowledge regarding the actual number of death rates, what are the actual number of death rates, what are the cases they are daily reporting. On the also situation, it also shows that Chinese having a bureaucratic problem also in a go. So this is how China handled the first wave of COVID-19. But as soon as they understood the grave importance of COVID-19 and how dangerous it could be, they took some major important changes in their ideology and put our nation on lockdown. Deployed the police, military and paramilitary forces to keep a check on people, are people following the proper precautionary measures or not, and are they having a proper necessity facilities in their reach or not. All these they are keeping a track over it. But even after all these measures, we will see now we will see a recent and a much bigger wave in Beijing is being reported with as much as 365 new cases within one board cell. So it is very alarming for China at a recent point of time to see how they will cope up with the second wave of COVID-19. And this actually put Chinese government under a target or in much more panicking situation because as soon as situation got normal, started to normal in China, people started to take COVID-19 as very lightly. With moving out in public in large chunks without proper sanitation measures of sanitizers and without face masks. All this leads to a second wave of COVID-19 in Asia in particular. So, to deal with this, Chinese government, what they do not go back to the nationwide lockdown this time. But what they do, they keep a small and precautionary measure control type of a measure to combat the spread of second wave of COVID-19, in which just only have a limited number of lockdown over the houses, but also have increased the number of testing they're going to do to control the second wave of COVID-19 that China might be facing recently or in near future. It's not it's not that much a big wave. If they don't take a proper measures, they will face a bigger wave in the future, which will be much more harmful and much more difficult to control. I would say.
Shiveti,
Hello, Shiveti.
Shiveti.
I think speak now.
Uh, can we continue on this? Like, how do you do? Shiveti.
I think she's not here.
So let's continue. So, but if you note something, the recent, have you noticed something that with respect to its China, COVID and the WHO and China, there is some kind of conspiracy theories and where Trump states that uh, WHO has been a Chinese organization, Chinese front for
Hmm.
establishing their ideas and goals and other things. But however, it doesn't make sense. It's very hypocritical because if you see in the historic terms where China has always been in touch with WHO and has always maintained with a close contact. Even during the early stages, the establishment of PRCs, there was USSR and US were the two major superpowers back then. So at
Hmm.
that time, USSR and China shared a superficial levels of communism. So they too had some kind of diplomatic establishment where health diplomacy was carried out. That was the first instance of diplomacy carried out with China, I mean Chinese
Hmm.
history. So the diplomacy was obviously it was in a bidirectional way, but however China was the at the receivers, and given the fact it had the limited set of technological innovations and prowess, so
Mm-hmm.
compared to USSR. So as the
Yes.
timeline progressed, Chinese and USSR relations deteriorated. So in result, US had used that opportunity. So at that point of time, there was the so-called ping pong diplomacy, which was followed by China in abandoning the earlier policy of leaning towards one side, that is supporting the USSR. Rather than that, China just kind of improved its relationship with the US. That's ping pong diplomacy, which is termed of on the fact that there was a ping pong event where US
Mm-hmm.
sportsmen came to China to play, and that followed with the visit of U.S. president. So that followed the establishment of proper relations between the two countries. So and that became a precursor to the Chinese entrant towards the WHO. So and the proper recognition of PRC towards WHO. Only then the China's engagement with WHO began. And also what's it's also very like interesting that WHO and its establishments, the entire process concept of UN has been a predominantly a Western concept that's been under the leadership of United Nations, United States. So when you say WHO has been a Chinese organization, so earlier on the fact US used the same organization to propagate its own interests. So it can be also stated that in similar terms where WHO was also a US fronted organization earlier. So the very point of US accusing China as a China's using WHO has been a bit hypocritical. Of course, it sounds pro China, but if you think about it rationally, it's gonna be a very hypocritical stance. And one more thing is also to be noted that is Chinese engagement with WHO is not suddenly due to COVID-19 or like election of terrors, back in 2016 or BRI, something like that. It has always been earlier as well. Chinese has for China it was like for them even during when they were the Cold War between US and USSR, China actively tried to establish itself as a third pillar of power because it itself doesn't see submissive towards the two powers. It sees itself as equal, and it has always been. It has so and it found Africa as a one particular region where it could establish its influence independently, much akin to a non-alignment movement of India. Of course, India didn't actually, purposely use an agenda. It happened naturally. So that's a different scenario. But it can take in a similar way, where China used, China thought African countries can be an avenue for their own ventures. So that was the first engagement between Chinese medical diplomacy in Africa in somewhere around 1950 to 1960s. So and followed by the WHO's involvement. It then instead of doing a bilateral relations, it used WHO as the forefront to establish its presence in Africa more. So that's there. And also during the uh, China has always opposed WHO as a platform to establish similar norms towards application of similar norms to all the countries, whereas US wanted establish certain norms with that is equally applicable to all the countries, whereas China has always rejected the concept, saying that this is purely for a medical issue and it's not supposed to be politicized. So, but however, this contrasts the fact that it actively involved itself with the SARS, during the SARS outbreak. So there is always a to and fro kind of stance with China with respect to WHO. However, their involvement with WHO was like a continuous one, not something that has been like suddenly erupted due to the facts of BR or Xi Jinping is like trying to influence. So the very accusation of Chinese like working with WHO, WHO is China's pet or something like that is very hypocritical, and it's most likely like the most likely explanation would be like Donald Trump want to pacify its populace, like US is not doing great with respect to its COVID uh, operations, tackling COVID as such. So I think this would be a and if And also one more thing to be noted is not many European nations share the similar claim, openly opposing China on that stance as well. So this can be seen as an attempt to distract its populace from the lack of action from the US government itself. So that's there. Oh, I think that's all. Yeah. So I mean, Shiveti, you have something else to add? Shiveti,
Yeah, Hari. So,
you have something else to add on this?
sorry, there was some technical glitch. So, yeah, as you rightly said, China has actually donated approximately 50 million to the WHO and aided 140 nations. So, although the conspiracies, investigations, and all continue, but right now, all we have is like wait for the investigations to go on and wait for the medicines to come and expect and better international cooperation because that's where the solution lies. So, along with this, moving on to our next uh, question, and that forms the very crux of the whole pandemic, to where the only solution lies, is the progress of the medication or the vaccine sector. So, along with the dire need to control the rapid spread of the virus, we also observe kind of a rat race amongst the nations over the creation of the vaccine, right? Ravaging over some 160 medicines across the world that are in various stages of testing. For example, at present moment in India only, we have three vaccines that are in different phases of clinical testing. Two indigenous ones being the Bharat Biotech vaccine and the DNA vaccine of Zydus Cadila. They have completed phase one and will begin phase two sooner, while the Oxford vaccine is in phase two currently. So, Hari and Anmol, in lieu of the given advancements, can either or both of you highlight some of the major vaccine development projects across the world, simultaneously helping our viewers to understand why this pandemic has spawned one of the hottest vaccine races in history? Up to you guys.
So, in that regard, I would like to say that at the current point of time, having a vaccine is like a feather in a cap for any company. So, and knowing the situation that China is right now at a global level, China certainly wished to have that golden feather in its cap to improve its condition. So, as soon as China came to know about the COVID-19, it started its race toward the vaccine as soon as possible, and also deployed as much as money and resources it can toward the vaccine project. Because China government not only knows that it is important for the safeguard of the people, but they also know that for the safeguard of the interest at the global level, for the interest at global level, and to save the image at the global level, we need to do something like that. So they took a move toward the COVID vaccine. And in view of this, they started some major vaccine project like Sinta Pharma, one of the Chinese pharma companies, started a trial for the vaccine to an antibody virus, inactivated virus vaccine, to an inactivated virus vaccine in which we started a third phase trial in UAE 2 weeks back to know how effective that vaccine actually is over the people, and the results are still yet to out in the public, whether it can be used in the future for the future research or for future references to other countries or for the China itself to control the COVID-19. In fact, China had a quite a faith in the inactivated vaccine, virus-based vaccine that they invest most of its resources in that area. And not only this, another institute of China is working on similar lines as the Institute of Medical Biology, Institute of Medical Biology of China in China is also working on similar line and developing a similar vaccine for the cure of COVID-19, which is also in the second phase of its trial and being active and very much active in Brazil and other regions since the last week of June. So it is very tempting to see how China will use this global range of COVID-19 vaccine at the global level to just not just to help its people, but to have its share of respect or have its share of accountability over the nation that is losing over a period of time due to COVID-19 crisis that initiated somehow in the China region. So that's my take. Or let's see what Hari has to say on the same thing.
Yeah, Hari.
Well, I won't say much about the vaccine efforts because most of the things have been covered in the annual. So I agree with this few terms. But also one more thing that's been like one more thing interesting take is rather than the vaccine, the more preventive measures have also been like taken place. You know, the earlier pandemics usually the preventive measures are much enforced much later upon. So at COVID, there's this kind of norm that every country is in the race to like make sure that their country is not at the worst affected in this. However, each of the country with regard to implementation, it's a mixed bag. But however, with because countries which like since China and its counterpart Taiwan are like on the major supply chain with respect to masks. So I want to focus on the term mass diplomacy because it's almost like both the countries are like competing each other. I would like yeah Taiwan region for in this case. So even Taiwan region is the second largest producer of mass. So both of them are in close race with each other in supplying of masks. However, the quality of marks was questionable. So with regards to that, that has even like improved Taiwan's stance with respect to arena. So that is one more thing, a trajectory that's been like taken like in a totally different tangents because vaccine efforts one side mask the preventive measures is like given a chance for them to showcase a softer measure that gives the positive aspect of the nation. Like yeah, of course, social media is filled with so many negative comments, and the people are not buying it. That's there, but on the sidelines, this thing is still carried upon despite the progress of the and more increased number as well. It has given an opportunity for the economic, like as a significant job market within the country as well. So for them, as a since whatever the existing in addition to the existing production, the rest of the manufacturing units has been focused towards mask as hand sanitizer, medical equipments. Since China has been manufacturing hub in very since globalization as much ever since it entered into the global markets. So that's when it has a significant advantage, to propagating its measures, and a lot of resource mobilization has been taken place on that end. So that has a different mix effects with different countries. However, it has certain positive as well, negative as well. Some countries are taking it because they have no other choice, whereas some countries are opposing it due to their personal gains with regards to accusing China can for US for example, accusing China can give a positive stance for the administration, whereas some countries actually for the rational reasons, for example, masks quality is not that great. So that's there. So that's another take we can take. Yeah. That's all from my end. So yeah.
Yeah. So, going along the lines to which the discussion has already taken its turn into, let's move on to our next segment of today's discussion, which talks about the impact of COVID-19 on China and its international relations, what you were just talking about, Hari. So, we'll have a detailed analysis of the same. So, adding on to what we discussed about international cooperation, the tussles, the controversies between the nations, increasing competition and struggles. China came up with a neutral investigation also to investigate the opinions of one country, which hardly seemed to satisfy the other nations. China has certainly surrounded itself with an unprecedented external adversity and challenges in the long run over the COVID-19 crisis. So, delving into the details of this and being country specific, the first question that comes into our mind is undoubtedly the US. So, the first nation that comes into our mind. So, starting right from being quite upfront about the independent investigation on the virus to the ongoing Cold War scenario, supply chains, vaccinations, etc. How, according to you, Anmol, has the already pretty vulnerable relation between these two nations modified since the outbreak of this pandemic?
between the you mean between the US and China, right?
US and China.
Yeah. So, if I talk about the US and China situation in particular, it is very difficult to say a bit because we all live in a closed-knitted economy. But due to the recent turn of events due to COVID-19, we will certainly see a major decline in US and China relationships, especially in terms of political and trade, and more specifically in the areas of manufacturing of medicines, drugs, and more specifically manufacturing and tech-led industry, because US is somehow mostly dependent on China, especially in the areas of tech and manufacturing industry or consumable goods. So we will start to see a decline in these areas when it comes to the trade. And if I talk about the political relationship, it's not gonna be okay in very soon in recent years, because given the Trump regime over the in USA in recent period of time, and the coming up of the US election also, in which we have a 50-50 scenario that almost means 50-50 scenario that Trump might get re-elected. So in such a scenario, we will definitely not see a better political relationship between the US China. US China, as both the countries are blaming each other due to the COVID-19 regarding the origin, its accountability, its responsibility, and none of them are ready to take a back step in this regard. So it is very interesting on the first one. Secondly, yeah, when someone is in disadvantage, other people will always try to take advantage from it. And if I talk about in China's perspective, China is no different. So there are many countries in out that they're definitely going to take advantage of China's disadvantage due to the COVID-19, and we will in such a scenario we will surely need to see how the things will change between US and China, whether they will become worse, whether they will become better off, or they will remain the same. Because filling in the Chinese shoes at present is very difficult, as China has quite a good hold over its not only just on its market but over its trade also and its trade channels. So it is going to be very interesting in future to see how the relationship between US and China will take shape and change. So that's my call over the US-China relationship and the declining phase that the US and China is seeing right now at present. Thank you, Shiv.
Yeah, no, not only US, it's also the same in other countries. For example, perceptions of China have also worsened to a significant degree during the crisis in an otherwise comparatively neutral country, which is Europe, which was covered by the European Council on Foreign Relations. In its recent unlock survey, even after China's aid and assistance to some nations, uh, the country was pretty biased towards not liking China. The people voted for the anti to go for anti-China products. They were
Correct.
more nationalistic on that perspective. So, Hari, why do you think is Europe, which has otherwise remained one of the major trading blocs of China, and China vice versa, flapping its wings and along which direction? What is your take on this?
See, yeah, Europe is another interesting perspective. Compare, like similar on US. Okay, because Europe is like a spectator of what's happening between Europe, sorry, China and US.
Right.
So when you take Europe, so there are like two things you have to know. One is the UK relations with the China, and given the recent Brexit event that's been affected UK significantly. Another one is the European Union, the core European Union itself. So if you take UK for example, UK has been a part of European Union, so it had a significant advantage has being a global financial center. And it was a since English has been a predominant language within the kind of world, that has been a major advantage for London as much as a financial center. So now, given the fact that Europe is it's leaving European Union, its stature has been a bit reduced compared to its earlier stature. So now it's like actively involving itself within the international events. And given there was another issue was the Hong Kong crisis that's recently occurred, given UK's significant interest historically and the current aspects as well. So that is another case where UK is trying to assert itself. It's position, UK. So, and also with also it is in a conflict zone where it's trying to find a legal loophole where it can avoid itself from the implementation of Huawei's telecommunication networks, because Huawei has been like the technical brand ambassador for China. So that's there. So these are the three factors that's been affecting UK significantly. And given the current stance that UK's diminished role, it significantly requires US as an ally to have a significant presence within the global arena. And now there is a differing views between UK's administration as well as Donald Trump, each giving different views. So that's another lot of confusion. It's a whole lot of mess in UK. So if that's the case, if you go to Europe, there's another lot of mess. There again, they're taking a back seat in this. They're a dictator, and since despite being a multi-country organization, we all know that there is significantly only two countries that play a major role within the politics, in addition to obviously the Belgium, or that's France and Germany. France and Germany have their own interests with Chinese in similar lines to UK, despite not being a independent bilateral method. Through EU, they have trying to pursue their own agenda, and both the countries require technical upgradation, and Huawei is the future as well. Also, they have an option of like taking up alternatives, but Chinese economic might and also their vulnerability in the global markets, and the France and German companies, they have their own markets as well. And China is a really lucrative market as well. Given all these factors, they are significant dilemma and the crossroads where go pro China or anti China. So rather than reacting to either of them, they're in a neutral position, so that they are going in a humanitarian way. Even for example, when there was a call for investigations by, on China with regards to its action with COVID-19 crisis, well, US was for it. EU was significantly like toned down in its like voice, and Germany and France were both like for calling investigations, but they meant it in a humanitarian way, suggesting China that we could do it for the world good rather than like accusing China directly. So that's a way, way go around, explaining the stuff, complex relationships between those two countries. And since they have vested interest in China, EU as a whole cannot go against or for China, because these two nations like lead the trajectory of EU. Since when these two nations are unable to actively pursue against China, EU doesn't have much to say about it. So rather than actively involving itself, it's keenly watching what's happening around the world so that it can, enter into the picture on the later front. So that's it for EU and for UK as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Hari. And with this, we are done with the Western part. We come on to the Asian regional diplomacy now. Uh, that is, last week, China held its webinar with some South Asian neighbors like Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, focusing on COVID-19 fight. It concluded with a decisive decision to battle with the virus and gradually promote cross-border trade, facilitate the construction of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) and the Trans-Himalayan Multi-Dimensional Connectivity Network. But again, it did not limit itself to the few nations it has been supported with. Uh, China has naturally also been actively engaged in soft power diplomacy, supplying medicines and aids to the neighboring nations and modifying the trade bloc. What do you think, Anmol, does this assistance involving huge investments and power relations justify the ongoing Cold War within the Asian nations and the Indo-Pacific per se?
See, if I talk about the South Asian region and the Chinese equation at present, it is very complex, you can say, and very different. But one thing to note that is still China is regarded as the alternative world order by many, especially in South Asian region, because given to the fact that China has three corridors that are running all across the Himalayan belt. which is a very major belt when it comes to the South Asian region, as Himalaya holds a quite a good importance in not
Right.
only at the global perspective but especially in the South Asian perspective. So having three belt within the same corridor is very important and having a good importance in the global matter also. So China has three economical belt where one is in Pakistan and China corridor, then there is the Nepal corridor, and then there is a Burma corridor. This significantly improves and strengthens the Chinese position within the South Asian region. Another point to note that is that China is the second largest world economy, and this alone set apart the China from the rest of the South Asian region. Because of this, China has actually acted as a bridge between not just for the South Asian region but for the Western countries to link the South Asian belt with the rest of the world. Keeping all this in view, there is one thing that we need to keep a note is that given the present geographical scenario and the political environment that is being created, India can act as a major threat to the China and its autonomy over the South Asian region. Because India is a new market and slowly and gradually it's becoming a major hub for not only for the Western countries but for the small Western countries that are there in the region itself to invest and to come and have their market and their business in the southeastern region, especially in India. So, in this respect, India can act as a major helping hand for the rest of the countries and major threat to the China itself. But here we need to keep a note that India cannot have the same hegemony over the South Asian region as the China. It has its different style, and for that we need to think of unilateralism as a solution, rather than as a composite culture or a combined culture that China is using to have until now a combined control over the whole region. We need to think of a unilateralism as an approach to come up with a more practical approach to deal with the situation. Because given India has a close knitted relationship with most of its most of its neighbors, and not only this, it allows its neighbors and Western countries to have a trade facilitation, FDI, great FDI market, and open market economy. Which not only provide them with humongous opportunity to invest and have a cordial relationship with each other, but also have a strong sense of sense of harmony between each other, rather than having a cordial fight over the trade relations. India always have a policy of maintaining a peaceful situation within the region. So this will not only have the neighboring countries, but also the Western countries who are always looking for a more peaceful and more reliant way of dealing or doing business. Another point to note is that with the change in scenario, with the change in mindset of the people within the region, people are now South Asian region people are not seeing themselves as a individual unit rather than as a combined unit of South Asian region. They are not they are now people seeing themselves as an individual unit and having their own personal identity rather than as a combined identity. For instance, if I say Sri Lanka, if I quote Sri Lanka sees itself as more of a Indian Ocean, as a part of a more of a Indian Ocean region than as a part of a South Asian region. Similarly, Pakistan has a more close knitted relationship with Pakistan, China than as rest of the countries. This definitely shows that South Asian regions are moving toward unilateralism, and India can have a upper hand in that regard. Since, not just because of its not just because of its trade market, but because of its political understanding of its neighboring countries and its neighboring environment, through which it always maintained a friendly and cordial relationship with every other neighbor of its region. So that's how we will conclude the scenario of South Asian region and China, to be more precise. I guess.
Yeah, Anmol. Also, when you talked about India, you said that it has also been very cautious of each and every step taken up by China since the very beginning, which is very obvious. So even India has supplied medicines and aids to almost 150 nations. It's very best to keep up with the competition and bring in
Sorry,
the
Shiveti, you are
Asian.
quite unclear.
Yeah,
Can you repeat? You are quite unclear. Can you repeat your question?
yeah, sure, sure. I was just saying that even India has been, supplying medicines and aids to almost 150 nations, trying its level best to keep up with the competition and bring down the Asian hegemony. So Vietnam has also stepped in for the better. So given some geopolitical presets, can you also specify particularly India's evergreening and ongoing relations with China?
Yeah. So, if I talk about India and China's relationship, this is India has quite a conflicting relationship with the China. It is not very clear when we are having a friendly relationship with China and when we are having a cordial, not so cordial relationship with China. Because it is very difficult to predict what China what will be the China's next step in this regard. In the scenario, if I take the recent events of India-China thing, India is very firm and separate that India will not attack or will not enter into fight with any country until and unless it has a fear of getting attacked by the other country. And similar thing happens to China recently when we see in earlier May a range of multi-billion attacking over the Ladakh region. So in view of this, to have a peace within the nation and the China, to control the China's comeback, India has to attack to come up with something to control the China. And in this view, Indian government is left with no other option rather than to have army and a political fight with each other. They just come up with an second alternative and they just ban the range of apps that are operating in India of the Chinese to have a economical to give a sort of economical impact to the Chinese economy up to a certain extent. And not only this, but they also few weeks back they also again again 49 secondary apps that are from Chinese operating system, which is again hamper the Chinese economy somehow. In addition to this, I yesterday itself I came across a news item which says that China, because of from India's hand itself, China has a loss of 4,000 crores. From the India's plastic business itself, that is a huge market for China until recent years, like until this year. So it is a very huge economic loss for China if I talk about India-China relationship, and we will continue to see the same shift of India towards China in recent years. I think we will continue to see the same approach by the Indian government towards the China because right now India-China relationship are not very cordial and it is the same risks that we used to have with China in terms of trade. But if I say we can totally survive without Chinese trade market, it is very difficult because India has a very bigger consumer market that is there, and China is a major supplier of a consumer goods towards India. So still the things are not very cordial between us. We need to have a certain friendly relationship with each other still to balance both the economies and to have a go and throw motion liquidity for the economies to work and have a certain relaxation in the COVID-19 crisis that the global economy is actually facing right now. That I can say right now with regard to the China-India relationship or the impact of China-India relationship that we are facing.
Yeah. Thank you, Anmol. Hari, would you like to add on to some point to this between the Asian
Pretty much.
nations and China?
So I hope, yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the Middle East region has been missed out. Like briefly, I'd like to add a few points over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Middle East. I mean, right now, China has kind of used its COVID as a timeline for them to propagate their BRI. The efforts have been amplified also. For example, there was Turkey, despite having complex relations with China on the issues of persecuting Uyghur Muslims, so it has accepted certain measures. So that has been seen as Chinese a victory in its stance, diplomatic victory for them as well. So and also they claim some kind of special vaccine which still hasn't been kind of public as in it's not in public domain. So that is one thing also. And also as Anmol earlier stated in the vaccine effort, China has been actively involved with the UAE and Saudi as well with regards to building resource centers, for vaccine development as well. So it is going in different paces. So that's yet to be seen. The progress is yet to be seen. With regards to Iran, because Iran, due to the before COVID, there was sanctions on Iran from US end, so that had a significant drop in of countries, having the bilateral relations with Iran. So that's and Iran has positioned itself as a significant partner for China as well, and also vice versa. China has a vested interest in the oil in the Middle East since it's more easier. It's an alternative point of entry for China as well. So that has been reflected in the mass diplomacy as well, where Iran was one of the first countries to donate certain amount of mass to China. When vice versa that happened was when Iran had a significant shortage because Iran was one of the worst countries in the Middle East to be affected by the COVID-19. So China was one of the leading sponsors for medical donations as well as implementation of medical measures to prevent the concentration of COVID cases within the country. So that is one significant key points to be noted with respect to China's efforts to amplify its BRL in using COVID as a medical diplomacy, and should showcase the positive image of China within the region. So that's there. So yeah, that's the only thing I need to add.
Yeah, well, that makes some sense because Asia is a very large block, and you have to go region by region to define the
Yeah.
relationships because it's literally very confusing. So now moving on to some lesser developed nations like Latin America. So China has been Brazil's largest trading partner since 2008. Plus, China's Belt and Road Initiative has recruited 19 states in Latin America and the Caribbean, ensuring billions of dollars of investment. The region has therefore increased in, exports to China during COVID-19 crisis, especially the Brazilian sugar and Argentinian beef. I guess. Yeah, Argentinian beef it was. So China likewise has helped provide medical equipment, enhancing its soft power. How do you think, Hari, does this trade and economic adds up to China's soft power, political game, or diplomacy?
Could we come again with the last part?
The soft power diplomacy between China and Latin America.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, to let me begin with this thing. Okay. So, where if you, there has been a statistic that states that compared to all the regions, Latin America is one particular region where there has been a predominant positive image for China, despite having a very minuscule trade compared to US. Because for Latin America is counted as US sphere of influence. So that's despite the level of trade between the two countries, China has been seen a significant positive image. And as compared to US, China has increased engagement with Latin American region of COVID-19, with respectively with diplomacy, which I was discussing earlier. And what's to be noted is China has engaged with Brazil with respect to vaccine development. Now it's in phase three trials, but however, we are yet to be know what's the actual result of that particular vaccine. This is in addition to the Middle East one, which I discussed earlier. And the one interesting thing is China is like, implementing all these vaccine trials in various parts, vaccine trials and development in various sections of the world, simultaneously. So that is another aspect of soft power measures engaged by China. And also one more thing is, uh, with Venezuela is like engaged in predominantly engaged in a barter system where in exchange for oil, significant investments supposed to be made, or payments to be made. So that's how the thing works, and that has and due to US sanctions for the particular country, it is like saving grace for that country as well. And one more thing to be noted is there is no direct actual state interaction happening over there. Just the private players like Alibaba or Huawei or Citi for that matter, they are engaged in those countries, propagating the country's soft power measures in a private space. That's happening over there. And also, even with respect to humanitarian measures like providing food reserves and improvising food reserves, all those engagement has been taken place using the working unions, workers unions of the respective countries. China has a national union that has been engaged with Latin American workers union. There's significant tie-ups between those two, and that's been amplified in the COVID-19. Also, one more thing, despite the minuscule trade between the two countries, there is like 163 million worth of mergers and acquisition that has been taken right now. And of course, 163 million is not a big amount compared to billions of trade that's been happening between countries and all. So what should be noted is 163 million within a short span of time by China is a significant question mark over there on the project what China is trying to do over there. That shows China's vested interest in the region as well. And this has been increased from the pre-COVID era. I mean, by 6% at least. That is there. And 6% within a short span of time of 2 months is like a really questionable number. So that's very much prevalent in the Latin American region, and that shows the complexities and the vested interest of Chinese people. So yeah, that's there for the Latin American. That's all for Latin.
Yeah, and I guess just like Latin America, Africa has also been immensely helped and provided aid by China during the crisis. If I'm not wrong, with Chinese investors are increasingly facing more restrictions in the US and Europe, their appetite to invest elsewhere may also increase, and that's what is happening with Africa. So, with a huge trade deficit, debt traps, and political instability, how do you perceive China's relations with Africa?
Right. Right. There are multiple tangents within African continent, given it's a continent. So yeah. So unlike Latin America, of course, Africa also has rich in mineral resources. Chinese market is so huge, and they require those the natural resources that's there in the one end. But unlike Latin America, this is not an immediate development. Engagement with Africa has been for a long time since 1950s, or when that was China's first medical diplomacy was started in Algeria in the 1950s. So it's way back then. So Africa and China has been in significant bilateral relations way back then. It's not something occurred due to like AI or COVID or sudden geopolitical movement. So that's there, and that's the one that you have to keep it in top of your mind when you're entering into the African continent. So that is one more thing is with respect to this debt trap and other aspects of financial trapment or all those aspects. China has announced that it's likely to be, disregarding all those loans and financial commitments for African region, and so that relieving those African regions. As we all know, Africa is one of the impoverished region of the world, and they can't afford such, financial commitments at this period of time. Thankfully, compared to the rest of the world, COVID is just in the nascent phase. At least it was in the last month. So it's been gradually developing. And since Africa had a experience in fighting Ebolas and all those things, it has been it's relatively well placed compared to other regions. So since COVID is a late entrant, it was anticipated by Africa, and using that as a strategy, China has even used multilateral fronts like WHO to announce and aid measures and relief measures, and as well as resource mobilization to tackle this coronavirus in a 2 billion package. Whereas if Latin America, if you can go 1 billion loan, whereas that's an independent bilateral loan, whereas in Africa it's a multilateral front. Now, why this use multilateral front is because you have to notice there is another aspect of African countries playing a wider role in the UN politics as well. And UN politics traditionally in the General Assembly and Security Council, African regions have been like given some importance, and they have a significant voting share also. And this has been reflected many times throughout the UN history, where African nations have favored China in their, if on any issue that involves China as one of the, one of the key members in the conflict. So that is there. So that has been reflected over here. So in addition to the general idea of the mineral resources that's very lucrative for China, This is another thing. Also, the emergent Africa is an emergent destination for telecommunications as in the 5G and the upcoming digital push also. Since the region is very much interactive and very much uh, very much interested in adopting such kind of kind of measures because Africa is a very it's not very interconnected and it's not very much into the like movement of transport and logistics. So this technological innovations is a key component for development of Africa. So that is there. So and Chinese is like Chinese companies are very much into it and they're taking advantage of it also. For example, there is a certain company for I'm not sure the company name, but it is not even in the top 20 company mobile manufacturers of the China, but it is one of the major players in Africa because the reason is the prices what they charge the cheap mobiles what they launch in China is very much easily
Right.
accessible for the African nation, where the top end models from Chinese companies, the top players, it's not accessible for them, and they are capitalizing this. These are the kind of vested interests. Also, Alibaba also is planning to enter African markets, and same goes with Huawei. Huawei is entering almost every part of the world. Tata is over here as well. Also, the last thing that has to be noted with the African continent is China is kind of pushing African continental free trade deal, okay, because it's already been pushed, but the implementation is very much, lethargic. COVID has given a chance because of the cutting of supply chain with the global market. There's a possibility of intra-Africa trade that's going to be like taken place, and this agreement plays a vital role. So, and this is really beneficial for China. As I mentioned earlier, China is in every part of the supply chain within the African markets, and it's going to be one of the beneficiary of this. So that is for Africa. So yeah,
Well, certainly, it's all that we can conclude about is it's all about the economics of the region, the supply chains, the trade, and the soft power diplomacy along with that. So, along with these geopolitical implications, the supply chain and the trade mechanics is another most important sectors that need to be conversed about right now. And as the health and human toll grows, the economic damage is already evident and represents the largest economic shock the world has experienced in decades, right? So, for example, we can also see how the demand for metals, transport-related commodities, uh, agricultural markets, the exports of energy or industrial commodities have been hard. On the contrary, we can also see how the digitalization process has boomed and the if the product the sale of sanitizers and masks, as you already discussed, Hari, you had rightly pointed out this. So the sales of these particular things have gone up. E-commerce has boomed. So along these lines, what is your take? How is the economics of this COVID-19 crisis working? And this question is open to you both.
Okay, so like I like to go first. So, in this
Yeah,
regard, what I would like to say is that China is putting itself in a serious economical crisis right now. But before going to the present situation, we need to see the little bit of a little history of China's trade in this area. China is a major market up till now, and might be for some states, for some countries, still is a major market. But due to the recent turn of events, China will have a quite a good economical impact on its economy, and during the time period, China is actually in a present actually is a recovery mode itself from the last 2008, the great depression that the world faced during the 2008 under such situation. COVID-19 crisis becomes an add-on to the China economical crisis, which is still there. Under such a situation, China is trying their best to keep themselves out of the COVID-19 economic crisis that they might be facing right now through huge investment in their infrastructure sector and manufacturing sector to push in the resources and money earned by allowing great amount of foreign direct investment in this sector from different regions, from by hook or by crook anyhow. either from the neighboring countries or from the countries that are still alive, having allies relationship with China. They are trying their best to to keep them in sync with the COVID-19 situation. But all these strategy, I think, are not gonna work much good for the Chinese economy, as we all know, none of us know how long this COVID-19 situation gonna take, how long its economical impact gonna take. As within the last 4 months itself, we can all see how great economical crisis we are all in. Given the complete shutting down of the global economical market in every form we can imagine, which will never happen in last any years or number of years if you imagine. Under such situation, again China find itself again at the center of another debate, which is geopolitical in sense, because of its responsibility and accountability that China haven't had over the COVID-19 crisis that the global world is facing. Under such situation, China think it can sink itself out of the COVID-19 crisis. It is very difficult, given its relationship with China, with USA is reporting, with India are reporting, with other European countries, as Hari has rightly mentioned, they are also reporting. Under such situation, having a hold over its economy, over its market, and over its resources, and to pull itself out from the COVID crisis, it's very gonna be really hard for the China. So it will be very new thing for the world to see how the China will pull itself out from the COVID-19 crisis in the near future. And right now, it is very difficult to say anything about that perspective because we are not having a very clear picture in that regard. So that's all. This thing.
Hari, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, I would like to add, I largely agree with what Anmol stated. So, in addition to that, I need to add few points. So, this COVID has significantly dented the SDG goals of United Nations. So, China is actually focusing on that. The soft measure at the end of the day, on a larger picture, to focus on that and the South cooperation, where China is a major player. So, of course, India is also a major player, but in a different stance rather than actually it's more politically motivated Chinese stance in the South. So that is one more trajectory that's rising right now. And also, despite its deterioration of relationship between Western nations, it still has a considerable influence with respect to Southeast Asia. For example, the Southeast Asian nations couldn't ban Chinese nationals, they couldn't close its borders despite all the cases. So that's happening. Despite the complexities of South China Sea issues that's happening right now, they still couldn't, completely go against China. With respect to Japan also, it's in a it is in a similar stance of European Union also. Like it's in a spectator seat, playing out all its cards. And also, if we go around African nations, largely it's been working out in a positive favor for China because of its power measures. It's been affected largely in the UN politics as well. China is seen as somebody who's like upholding multilateralism right now, whereas US is going the other way and where nationalistic isolationism. So that's what happening. That there is this balancing factor that's going, opposite direction where US was supposed to be the, leader in multilateralism, but it's the other way around. So that is, despite all its complexities, China has, despite all the accusations from its critics, China to a large extent has, successfully maintained its relations or hasn't able to exert certain amount of influence within these countries. Yeah, it might be given the lack of choices it's available, or it's given local political climate where they require non-interference, which is Chinese idea of political engagement, and that largely attacks them. So, despite COVID and the supply chain, China has to certain extent has able to land in a softer position, not in a very hard landing. It's not a very hard landing to be honest. So that is there. Of course, but like Anmol stated, we can't predict right now given the complex dynamics that's running right now. Yeah.
Right. Right. We may term it as a crisis or we may term it as an opportunity. All depends on how the stakeholders take it. Uh, so we have come to the end of a discussion, but before that, we have some questions for the viewers. So the first question is by Mr. Maniranjan. So he asks that by when can the world expect a pandemic and end of COVID-19 trauma? So yeah, this question is open to you both. So
I mean,
this is a question of
we can't
prediction. So
always predict when it's
yeah,
gonna
guys,
end. So yeah,
we have almost discussed it,
yeah.
but let's kind of summarize it for a viewer.
I mean,
So
Anmol, you want to go take about it because my mind is like we can't predict until unless actual vaccine has been completed.
Yeah,
So
actually,
going in
it is
different
very
stages.
difficult. If I say on this regard, it is very difficult to predict the end of the pandemic right now because the number of cases around the world is actually we can't see actually summing up to the negatives we can say. But with the patient, but somehow over the last 4 months or for some countries, it takes much more months. So over a period of time, people actually started to adapt to the new normal or new life of style of living. We can say people now know how to have a precautionary measures regarding the COVID-19 and how to save themselves from the immediate attack of the virus. To some extent, not completely, but to some extent, and how to keep the social distancing in a practical manner and to what is the importance of wearing the mask and using of regular use of sanitizers, washing hands, which are not just regular habits of any one of us or any one of us. People learn these manners and these habits and adopting themselves to these habits over a period of time is a one change that we can say, and this is how the new normal is gonna be in the near future also when the pandemic is gonna be end. But to be honest, when this pandemic is gonna be end is very difficult to predict. But secondly, it is how our life is gonna be changed forever. So, so we need to know some certain measures that we need to take in these to combat the spread of diseases like COVID-19 in future. Regarding such as we have to have a proper and strong. We need to focus on a strong healthcare center. We need to have a focus on more of a strong economical background and economical ground. We need to think more practically when it comes to the economical investment. We need to think more practically about our relationship with other nations. So all these gonna be affected regarding the pandemic and the COVID situation. That's all I can say in this regard. But the end of the COVID-19 is very hard to predict. I read
yeah,
this
of
regard.
course, Anmol. I mean, we can just expect and keep our fingers crossed that the vaccine comes as soon as possible.
Hmm.
Let's just hope that the recent experiment with the Oxford's medicine, becomes successful. Although we also know that even after it becomes successful, we'll have to live a new normal, as Anmol just pointed out. So moving on to our second question, which is by Mr. Aditya Kumar. What has COVID done to the international image of China? I guess we have covered it in our
Yeah,
discussion of China with the international China's relations with the different nations. But yeah, if we can summarize it, one of you can.
yeah, we have actually covered it in our.
Yeah, the image of China, like
So you
so.
want me to
Okay,
go with that?
if you can just summarize it in 2 lines or something.
I already begin with the opportunities and criticisms section which we spoke about earlier. Whereas China's image has been dented largely, that is very obvious theory. Uh, with regards to different countries, due to the complexities of international politics, it has not actually that dented. That's largely been exaggerated by the West. But it has maintained positive relationships between Southeast Asia despite the complexities and the their own issues with maritime issues in South China Sea. It has largely been able to sustain its relationship. Of course, the dynamics have been changed tonally, like to or fro at certain periods of time, but there is largely overall it's been the main. The same I can say for the Middle East as well, and for the African region also, whereas and Russia as well. Whereas South Asia, it's been a mixed bag, which has been Anmol has already explained earlier. And the criticism is largely from the West, but it's not to the level of exaggeration the West tries to portray. Yeah, but China largely has survived from the overall criticism. So yeah, it's the that can be said about it. Yeah.
Okay. So, moving on to our next question, which is from Mr. Harsh Agrawal. Do you guys think that China is trying to replicate US ways and create a monopoly? Well, that's something we need to answer. Either of you can take this up.
You want to take a move, or can I?
So, you can take it actually. I have no much idea about it.
I mean, like to be, yeah, thank you. Yeah, to be honest, I don't think China is trying to replicate US ways because honestly, it doesn't. It has, of course, every country wants to be a hegemony at some point of time. Everybody has its ambition. It's a very basis of international politics. But China's way is not definitely not a US replication. So, and China doesn't even want to be the only. It wants to be a hegemon. It wants to be it's an important player in the international arena. But it doesn't want to be an only hegemon because as much as it wants the praises and the acknowledgement, doesn't want to involve itself with especially the respective military segment of hegemon's responsibilities. Lastly, it has abandoned its military obligations to US right now. So I don't think it's like China is trying to replicate US ways through monopoly. US is more like balance mix of, or a mix uneven mix or a balanced mix at certain situations in history of both military and soft power measures. There are China more of an economic agenda as well as it want more of a center stage in the international economics, but not at the cost of spending its military activities. It uses military when it's necessary for its own, when it's the direct combating within the overall situation. So that's how it's been done. So this is my take on the question. So you have anything from
Yeah, like we can sum it up by saying that maybe it is, yes, it is trying to become a hegemon or trying to create a monopoly, but the ways must be different because US has been a capitalist country. Its ways have been more cooperative and friendly. Whereas China is tactically playing the soft power diplomacy. It's a socialist country also, and it has its different ways and means of getting into a different nations, and its ways of making friends is different. Is that what we can say? Because the replication of US ways won't be correct if we put it, but yeah, it is definitely trying to become a hegemon of the world, starting by Asia itself. Yeah, so that's the end of our question answer series. And with this, we come to the end of the discussion. Well, nonetheless, the immediate priority for policymakers is to address the health crisis and contain the short term economic damage. Over the longer term, authorities need to undertake comprehensive reform programs to improve the fundamental drivers of economic growth once the crisis lifts. So, in this discussion, we have covered the health sector of China and its relations with the other nations of the world. And we concluded by discussing about the economic perspectives of this crisis, the financial crisis, and the uh, whether it is an opportunity or it's whether it's a new normal, an opportunity, or the world is going to face a worse crisis in the long run. Whereas we still expect the vaccines to come up as soon as possible. And as French President Emmanuel Macron once said in his discussion with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison about the response to COVID-19, the urgency is for cohesion. So it's all that we need. At the end of the day, it's all about international cooperation and coordination. And with this, we end today's discussion. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Hari, and thank you, Anmol, for being our panelist. You can still put up your questions below, and we'll revert to them as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Yeah.
Thank you, Shiveti, for holding us.